When this Coast Guard spots movement on a remote island, he takes a closer look and can't help but scream, "God, no." Lieutenant Riley Beer had seen his fair share of tense situations during his decade-long career with the U.S. Coast Guard. But today was supposed to be different. A simple patrol over the Pacific, nothing more. The route would take them near Picolet Island, a remote coral island around 160 miles northeast of the main Yap Islands, known for its untouched beauty and isolation. The island rarely saw visitors. As Riley adjusted his course slightly, the aircraft glided over the desolate stretch of land. He stared down at the pristine white sands, a thin line separating sea and sky. Then something caught his eye, a flicker of movement, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of trees. At first, Riley dismissed it, thinking it might just be a trick of the light or a stray bird. But as they hovered closer to the shore, Riley's gaze fell on the sand, just beyond the tree line. There, carved into the pristine white beach in large, desperate letters, was a huge SOS scrawled in the sand. "Look at that!" Riley's voice sharpened as he pointed to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Justin Doy. "An SOS. Someone's in trouble down there." Justin's eyes went wide as he leaned in, taking in the scene. "That's no casual message. They're stranded, or worse." Riley adjusted the controls, slowing the chopper as they circled lower. "We'll radio this in and get rescue teams mobilized. But let's get eyes on the situation ourselves first. See if we can spot who we're dealing with." Justin nodded, already reaching for the radio. As the aircraft dipped lower, the movement that had caught Riley's eyes became more defined. Near the center of the island, he saw something unmistakable. People. "Guys, take a look at this." Riley called out to Justin as his pulse quickened, a knot forming in his stomach. "There shouldn't be anyone out here," he said. "Picolet Island is supposed to be uninhabited." As they flew closer, Riley's heart dropped. 3 figures on the island were waving frantically. Their emaciated forms were clear even from the air. Their gestures were desperate, full of a raw urgency that made Riley's skin crawl. A boat was drawn up on the sand. "God, no," he gasped. "They look like they've been out here for ages." The Coast Guard aircraft circled above Picolet Island as Riley Beer and the crew took in the scene below. The 3 castaways, a woman and 2 men, were frantically waving, desperately trying to catch the attention of their unexpected visitors from above. Their thin frames and tattered clothing made it clear that these people had been stranded for a long time. Riley's initial shock was replaced by an overwhelming sense of urgency. The castaways needed help, and they needed it fast. As Riley lowered the aircraft for a closer look, the situation on the ground grew more unsettling. The island's flat, sandy surface offered little in the way of protection from the elements, and the dense palm fronds at the center suggested the only shelter they had was a makeshift hut pieced together with whatever debris had washed ashore. It was a place no human being was meant to stay for long. "We need to get them off this island now," Riley said, determination hardening his voice. "Their condition doesn't look good." But even as he said the words, a quick glance at the horizon told him their task was about to get a lot harder. The once clear skies over the ocean had grown darker in the past half hour, and Riley could see the unmistakable signs of an approaching storm. Ominous clouds were gathering, their blackened forms expanding rapidly as they moved closer, bringing with them gusts of wind that rocked the aircraft. "Justin, we've got trouble coming in from the southwest," he said, checking the weather radar. "There's a fast-moving storm front. Looks like it could be severe." Riley's jaw tightened. "How long do we have?" Though the answer was already forming in his mind, Justin scanned the instruments and adjusted the radar's range. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before it hits. If we stay much longer, we'll be caught right in the middle of it." His expression was grim. "It's moving faster than expected." Riley gripped the controls tightly, his thoughts racing. There was no question that the castaways needed urgent help, but conducting a rescue under worsening weather conditions would be dangerous for both the crew and the stranded people below. The strong winds already pushing against the aircraft would make lowering a winch difficult, if not impossible. And with the approaching storm, the waves around the island were swelling, making a water landing out of the question. The helicopter support they would need for a safe rescue couldn't be dispatched into such conditions either. "Drop a radio and emergency supplies," Riley ordered. "We need to get them stabilized until we can come back." The crew quickly prepared a package with food, water, medical supplies, and a two-way radio, bundling it securely to withstand the drop. Riley circled the aircraft, bringing it to a low hover above a flat section of the island, and the crew released the bundle. It hit the sand a short distance from the castaways, who rushed forward to collect it. As the three figures ripped open the package, a voice crackled over the radio. "Can you hear us?" Riley said into his microphone, anxiety coursing through him. The reply came faint and trembling. "We hear you. Thank you. Please help us. We're the U.S. Coast Guard," Riley said, keeping his voice steady despite the urgency pressing on his chest. "We're here to help, but we've got bad weather rolling in. We have to return to base, but we'll be back for you as soon as the storm passes. We've dropped emergency supplies to get you through the night: food, water, and a medical kit." The silence that followed was punctuated by static. Then the same voice came back, fraught with desperation. "No, don't leave us. Please. We've been here for 33 days, eating whatever we can catch: rats, conch, and drinking rainwater. But Rita's blood sugar is very low. We need help, please." Riley swallowed, a knot of guilt forming in his stomach. "We have no choice," he said, his voice strained. "The storm is closing in, and it's too dangerous to conduct a rescue right now. We will come back for you." The approaching storm began to make itself known even more clearly. Gusts of wind surged stronger, causing the aircraft to lurch, and Riley could see the castaways stumble as the first droplets of rain began to pelt the sand. The temperature seemed to drop within moments, the air now thick with the charge of the coming storm. "Riley, we have to go," Justin said, his tone urgent. "Visibility is about to drop, and we won't be able to navigate safely if we don't get ahead of this." Riley hesitated for a heartbeat, his eyes fixed on the figures below, who clutched the supplies as if they were a lifeline. Then, reluctantly, he guided the aircraft away from the island. He glanced back, seeing the dark clouds roll in like a sweeping curtain, obscuring the tiny dot of land. The downpour came moments later, heavy and punishing, obscuring even the ocean below. The sense of helplessness gnawed at him. Leaving the castaways behind felt wrong, but the storm left them no choice. Any attempt to lower a rescue winch in those conditions would have been reckless. "With high winds, here's your text with grammar and punctuation corrected, with no other changes." Whipping the cable unpredictably and making it impossible to secure someone safely. A hoisting operation would have risked throwing one of the castaways or even a crew member into the ocean or against the side of the aircraft as they flew back to the Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, some 500 miles away. Riley couldn't help but replay the scene over and over in his mind. The desperate figures on the ground, their cries for help barely audible through the static. It wasn't just the technical obstacles of the storm that weighed on him. It was the human side of it, the knowledge that 3 people were fighting for their lives, and he had just flown away. The only solace Riley found was in knowing that they had left the castaways with enough supplies to get through the night. Additional patrols and support helicopters were already being organized for the next day. 3 hours later, as the aircraft touched down at base, rain began to lash against the windows of the airfield. Riley climbed out of the cockpit, feeling the sting of the cold wind as it whipped against his face. He knew that in the hours to come, he would lie awake, unable to shake the feeling that somewhere out there on that desolate island, 3 lives hung in the balance, enduring the storm alone. Riley couldn't shake the haunting image of the gaunt figures waving for help, and he wondered how they had survived for so long in such a hostile environment. The radio transmission had hinted at the dire conditions: dehydration, starvation, and exposure to the elements. He imagined their struggle each day to find enough sustenance to keep going. He debriefed the crew, who listened intently as he described the castaways' condition. Justin shook his head. "It's incredible they've survived this long at all. The heat, the lack of fresh water, it would have broken most people." The Coast Guard prepared to send out helicopters to monitor the island overnight, dropping additional supplies as necessary, while coordinating a full rescue for the following day. The mission now was clear: get those people off the island as soon as possible. The night was restless for Riley as he lay in his bunk, his mind replaying the desperate scene on the island. He thought about how the castaways had kept themselves alive for so long, relying on their sheer will to survive. They must have been terrified each time the horizon darkened, each night a reminder that rescue might never come. In the middle of the night, Riley woke from a fitful sleep and walked outside to the airfield, where a faint wind stirred the trees. He watched as a helicopter returned from a supply run, the pilot stepping down from the aircraft with a weary expression. "They're hanging in there," the pilot reported, "but just barely. We need to get them out first thing tomorrow." Riley felt a surge of urgency, as if time were slipping away with each passing hour. The island's rugged landscape, coupled with the castaways' weak condition, meant that a successful rescue would be challenging. Every detail had to go right. The following morning, the weather had cleared enough for Riley and the crew to launch the rescue operation. The helicopter flew low over the choppy sea, the wind pressing against the aircraft as it approached Picot Island. Riley's hands gripped the controls tightly, his nerves taut as he prepared for the dangerous task ahead. The helicopter hovered above the island. The castaways, looking even frailer in the stark light of day, their skin pale, their eyes sunken, and the clothes on their backs hanging like rags. Riley's heart tightened as he saw the woman stumble forward, her movements sluggish and unsteady. They lowered the winch, sending down a harness to lift each person to safety. The first man, his hands trembling from exhaustion, clung to the harness as he was hoisted up. As the helicopter crew pulled him inside, his breathing was shallow, his limbs shaking with relief and fatigue. Next came the woman. Riley's pulse quickened as she struggled to fit herself into the harness. The crew had to lower the winch more carefully for her, as her movements were sluggish and uncoordinated. As she was hoisted into the air, she seemed almost weightless, a fragile figure caught between life and death. When she reached the helicopter, the medics immediately checked her vitals and administered emergency treatment. The last man was brought up with difficulty, his body swaying with the motion of the winch. When he finally collapsed onto the helicopter floor, his eyes were red and glassy, but a faint smile broke through as he whispered, "Thank you." The helicopter sped toward the coast, carrying its precious cargo. Riley stayed close to the castaways, monitoring their condition as the medics worked to stabilize them. The woman was in the worst shape, her breathing still shallow and her pulse weak. The medics administered glucose to raise her blood sugar, all the while keeping a close watch on her vitals. The other two men lay on stretchers, sipping water slowly as they regained some of their strength. One of the men, his voice raspy and hoarse, tried to explain their ordeal. "We got caught in a storm and lost a lot of fuel. Weathering it, we drifted. We thought we were going to die." Riley nodded, his expression grim. "You're safe now. We'll get you to a hospital." As they neared the mainland, the sight of the coast filled Riley with relief. The castaways' ordeal was nearly over, and they would soon receive the care they desperately needed. The helicopter touched down at the medical facility, where doctors and nurses rushed to meet them. Riley helped transfer the castaways to stretchers, his eyes lingering on the woman. She was barely conscious, but the doctors assured him she was stable. "It's a miracle they made it through that," one of the doctors said, shaking his head in disbelief. In the days that followed, the castaways began their slow recovery in the hospital. Riley visited them, hoping to hear more about their ordeal. The details were sparse, bits and pieces of a harrowing story that still left many questions unanswered. They described how they had set sail from Phulet to Pulap atolls aboard their 23-foot skiff, but ran out of fuel and drifted off course. Eventually, they found refuge on tiny, uninhabited Pelot Island, nearly 125 miles away from their point of departure. For weeks, they had survived by building a makeshift shelter and catching whatever they could find for food. Each day had been a battle to hold on, and there were times when they didn't think they would make it. The woman's condition had worsened, leaving the men to care for her as best they could. As Riley listened, he felt a deep admiration for their resilience. Their survival was a testament to human endurance, a refusal to give up, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. Despite everything, they had clung to hope, and it had made all the difference. The U.S. Border Patrol continued to investigate the circumstances surrounding the castaways' journey. But to Riley, the specifics didn't matter. He had been there to save fellow humans in need, and that was enough. For Riley and his crew, The rescue would remain a vivid memory for years to come. The sight of three frail figures waving from an island that was supposed to be empty had changed them. It had been a reminder that sometimes the smallest signs could lead to the greatest acts of courage. An incredible story of rescue and human resilience. Do you think you could have survived being on an island like this? Why or why not? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.